God decided to place his hand upon me at a young age. Had no consideration for any failure or flaw that I was going to experience in my life. I had to go through it.
Prophet Brian Carn rose from a young preacher with a powerful voice to one of the most recognizable names in modern ministry. Admired by devoted followers, welcomed onto major platforms, and known for bold prophecies that drew massive crowds, he appeared to have an unstoppable future. But today, that remarkable journey has taken a dramatic and unexpected turn. A stunning legal admission, growing public outrage, and serious questions about trust have changed everything. So, what really happened? And how did one of America's best-known pastors end up here? This is the story. The shocking federal case. For many years, Prophet Brian Carn was regarded as one of America's most prominent and fastest-rising young ministers. While many pastors were still working to establish a local church, Carn was already drawing huge crowds to prophetic conferences, appearing on major Christian television networks, and gaining thousands of loyal followers through his powerful sermons and prophetic teachings. People traveled from different parts of the United States and even overseas, convinced that his ministry offered spiritual direction, encouragement, and life-changing messages. As he went on to establish Kingdom City Church and expand it into several locations, his influence continued to grow. To many supporters, he was more than just a preacher. He became a respected spiritual leader whose growing ministry and nationwide recognition made his later legal troubles all the more surprising and difficult for many people to understand. To countless supporters, Brian Carn symbolized hope, spiritual leadership, and the rise of a new generation of influential Christian ministers. His powerful sermons reached millions online, his prophetic conferences attracted overflowing crowds, and his ministry continued expanding across the country. Many looked to him as a trusted voice on faith, integrity, and living according to God's principles. That is precisely why so many were stunned when the respected preacher suddenly found himself standing before a federal court, forced to answer serious criminal charges that threatened both his reputation and everything he had spent years building. That dramatic turning point came when the U.S. Department of Justice announced that Brian Carn had pleaded guilty to obstructing the Internal Revenue Service's efforts to recover more than $600,000 in unpaid federal taxes. The announcement stunned both supporters and critics, instantly changing the conversation surrounding his ministry. According to federal prosecutors, the case was never about church donations or the ministry's tax-exempt status. Instead, it centered on income Carn personally received from his ministry and the steps he allegedly took to prevent the IRS from collecting the taxes it claimed he legally owed, turning a financial dispute into a serious federal criminal case. Prosecutors claimed that over several years, false information and misleading financial records were used in ways that prevented the IRS from accurately assessing his true income. Those allegations eventually led to a criminal case carrying the possibility of prison time and substantial financial penalties. Almost overnight, the conversation surrounding Brian Carn changed completely. Instead of discussing his prophecies, growing ministry, or expanding influence, headlines across the country focused on guilty pleas, tax obstruction, court hearings, and the uncertain future facing one of America's best-known pastors. What had once appeared to be another season of growth had suddenly become the biggest crisis of his entire public ministry. A pastor who had built a reputation for preaching righteousness and shunning evil was accused of evading taxes. But could he have been wrongly accused? Or was it simply a mistake on his part? Or did a role model to many Christians truly engage in a questionable criminal act? Let's find out. The financial moves that implicate Brian Carn. Before prosecutors filed criminal charges, investigators spent years examining Brian Carn's financial records, and what they uncovered convinced them that the case involved far more than an unpaid tax bill. According to court documents, everything began after Carn accurately reported earning more than $1 million in income during 2015, which resulted in a federal tax obligation exceeding $600,000. Rather than simply paying the amount or working out a solution with the IRS after collection efforts began, prosecutors alleged that he made a series of decisions that complicated the situation. They argued that those actions were not isolated mistakes, but part of a pattern that gradually transformed what could have remained an ordinary tax dispute into a federal criminal case, placing the well-known preacher under intense legal scrutiny and threatening both his reputation and his future. Court records allege that instead of resolving the growing tax issue, Brian Carn hired a second accountant and submitted what prosecutors described as a fake, backdated employment agreement. The document claimed that his yearly salary was only $120,000, along with a housing allowance, even though investigators argued that his true earnings were far greater. According to prosecutors, Carn regularly withdrew cash from ministry accounts and used church funds to pay for personal expenses, significantly increasing the income he personally received. Authorities alleged that this financial arrangement created a major gap between the income reported to the IRS and the money he actually benefited from, becoming one of the central issues in the federal criminal case. Federal prosecutors argued that the alleged financial misconduct did not end with a single amended tax return. According to court records, Brian Carn continued filing later tax returns using the same disputed financial information while reportedly presenting much higher income figures on credit applications, lease agreements, and other financial documents. Investigators claimed these different records painted two very different pictures of his finances. They also alleged that Carn failed to disclose certain valuable assets, repeatedly underreported his income over several years, and eventually stopped filing federal tax returns altogether after 2020, even though he continued receiving income through his ministry. Prosecutors maintained that these actions reflected an ongoing pattern rather than a one-time accounting mistake, ultimately strengthening the government's criminal case against him. According to the Department of Justice, those combined actions allegedly caused losses to the U.S. Treasury estimated between hundreds of thousands and more than $1 million. What had initially begun as an effort by the IRS to recover unpaid taxes ultimately became a federal criminal obstruction case, dramatically raising the legal stakes and placing one of America's best-known pastors in the middle of an increasingly serious courtroom battle. There appeared to be more than enough evidence suggesting that Brian Carn deliberately evaded taxes. But why would a preacher commit such a serious crime? Did he have an explanation for what happened? And if so, was his explanation convincing enough to believe? Let's uncover the shocking details. Brian Carn finally broke his silence. As news of Brian Carn's guilty plea spread rapidly across TV, online platforms, and social media, the controversy quickly gained global attention. Seeing the growing public discussion, Carn chose to speak out rather than let rumors define the story. In interviews and messages to his church, he openly acknowledged the case and accepted full responsibility for the tax issues. He confirmed that he had pleaded guilty and made it clear that he was not trying to shift the blame onto anyone else. Instead, Carn repeatedly acknowledged that his own decisions had led to the case, telling supporters that accepting responsibility was the first step toward making things right and moving forward. At the same time, Brian Carn strongly denied that he had ever set out to intentionally deceive the government. Instead, he described the entire situation as the result of poor financial decisions made during the fast-paced early years of his ministry. According to Carn, his life changed almost overnight as invitations to preach increased, large crowds gathered, and significant amounts of money began flowing through his ministry. He explained that he was suddenly managing finances without the knowledge or experience needed to handle such responsibilities properly. Having never worked a traditional job, received a regular paycheck, or learned how complex tax obligations worked, He said he was unprepared for the financial demands that accompanied his growing success. Even so, Carn acknowledged that a lack of experience did not excuse his mistakes and accepted responsibility for failing to manage his finances with greater care. Even as he explained how his lack of financial experience contributed to the situation, Brian Carn made it clear that he was not using it as an excuse. He openly admitted that inexperience could never remove personal responsibility and accepted that every decision comes with consequences. Rather than blaming others, he said he was determined to take ownership of his mistakes and make things right. Carn also revealed that he had hoped to explain the situation to his church family privately before it became public. But those plans changed when news of his guilty plea quickly spread across the country. Yet, despite expressing remorse and accepting responsibility, one particular statement overshadowed nearly everything else he said. During an interview, when asked about the possibility of receiving the maximum prison sentence, Carn confidently responded that he was not worried because he knew how to handle that stuff in the spirit. The unexpected remark quickly spread across social media, with supporters interpreting it as an expression of faith, while critics questioned whether it reflected confidence, optimism, or a failure to appreciate the seriousness of the legal case. Almost instantly, that single sentence became one of the most discussed moments of the entire controversy. Beyond Brian Carn's admission that he committed the crime, how did he begin his ministry? Was he truly inexperienced when his ministry grew, making him unaware of the importance of filing taxes? Or is there more to the story? Let's unravel the shocking details. The extraordinary rise of Brian Carn. Long before Brian Carn found himself at the center of a federal criminal case, he had already become one of the best-known young ministers in charismatic Christianity. To thousands of followers, he was more than just a preacher. He was someone whose spiritual journey appeared to begin remarkably early. Born in Jacksonville, Florida, in 1989, Carn has often said that he committed his life to Christ when he was only 8 years old. That decision shaped the course of his future in extraordinary ways. By the age of 12, while most children were focused on school and hobbies, Carn was already preaching publicly and even leading his first 3-day revival. His confidence, passion, and ability to command a congregation at such a young age amazed many people, helping establish a reputation that would continue to grow as his ministry expanded over the following years. As the years passed, Carn said he became increasingly dissatisfied with what he described as church as usual. Rather than accepting a routine approach to ministry, he believed God was calling him to something greater. That conviction led him into long seasons of prayer, fasting, and spiritual preparation as he searched for a deeper relationship with God and a clearer sense of direction for his future. According to his ministry, one of the most significant moments during that period came when well-known televangelist Benny Hinn publicly called him out during a crusade and prophesied that he would one day minister with a powerful anointing. Carn later pointed to that moment as one of the events that strengthened his belief that his ministry had a unique purpose. As the years passed, Brian Carn's ministry continued to grow at an impressive pace. He became a well-known figure on Christian television, traveled across the country, preaching at large prophetic conferences, and built a loyal following of thousands who looked to him for spiritual guidance, encouragement, and hope during difficult times. His popularity extended far beyond the pulpit. In 2016, he founded Kingdom City Church, a ministry that quickly expanded into multiple locations, establishing him as one of the most recognized and influential young voices in charismatic Christianity. To many believers, Brian Carn represented the emergence of a new generation of Pentecostal leadership, young, energetic, and deeply committed to faith. His rise appeared to reflect years of dedication, sacrifice, and spiritual ambition. That is precisely why the federal criminal case that later unfolded caught so many people by surprise. For supporters and critics alike, the contrast between the respected preacher they had followed for years and the man standing before a federal judge was both striking and difficult to ignore. Carn became a minister at a very young age, which may have contributed to his lack of knowledge about complex tax laws. But would the court take that into account? Or regardless of his explanation, would he still have to face the consequences of his actions? If so, what punishment did Brian Carn receive? Let's find out. The emotional courtroom hearing. Several months after pleading guilty, Brian Carn returned to federal court for sentencing. His guilt was no longer in question. Instead, the judge had to decide the appropriate punishment for the well-known pastor, who admitted to obstructing the IRS from collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid taxes. The ruling would shape both his immediate future and the legacy of this chapter in his life. During the sentencing hearing, Carn's legal team worked hard to present a broader picture of the man standing before the court. His attorney described numerous acts of generosity, explaining that Carn had quietly paid medical bills for people in need, helped struggling families regain stability, covered transportation expenses for others, and used his financial resources to support individuals attempting to rebuild their lives. The defense argued that while Carn had made serious mistakes, those mistakes did not erase years of helping countless people through both his ministry and his personal generosity. Perhaps the most emotional moment of the sentencing came when Brian Carn's father stood before the judge to speak on his son's behalf. Holding back tears, he admitted that although he had not been present to raise Brian, it was Brian who later reached out to him and helped him turn his life around. He described how their broken relationship had been restored through his son's love and support. His heartfelt testimony revealed a side of Carn that many people had never seen beyond the courtroom headlines and national controversy. When it was his turn to speak, Carn again accepted responsibility for his actions. He acknowledged that the decisions leading to the case were ultimately his own, and told the judge he was prepared to face whatever consequences followed. Prosecutors, however, maintained that he had still failed to fully grasp the seriousness of his conduct. Pointing to additional financial filings they believed continued to understate his income even after his guilty plea. After weighing both sides, the judge sentenced Carn to 9 months in federal prison, far less than the 3-year maximum he could have received, but enough, the court concluded, to reflect the seriousness of the offense. Carn was also ordered to pay restitution and was recommended for placement in a minimum security federal facility, reinforcing the judge's view that genuine accountability required more than public admissions of regret. Brian Carn was sentenced to 9 months in federal prison instead of the maximum 3 years, partly because of his guilty plea and the judge's consideration of the circumstances presented during sentencing. But what will this sentence mean for Brian Carn's reputation? Will his followers continue to hold him in high esteem? And can he rebuild the trust that took years to earn? Let's find out. Brian Carn's biggest test. Although the courtroom proceedings have largely reached their conclusion, the story surrounding Brian Carn is far from over. The guilty plea, the sentencing, and the judge's final decision may have brought the legal battle to an end, but they have also opened a new chapter filled with uncertainty about what comes next. Carn must now serve his 9-month federal prison sentence before beginning a period of supervised release. He is also required to make monthly restitution payments as part of the court's order, obligations that will remain with him long after he leaves prison. While the legal process has delivered its verdict, rebuilding his reputation may prove to be an even greater challenge. Following the sentencing, Carn's attorney released a public statement emphasizing that the pastor fully understands the seriousness of what happened. According to his lawyer, the experience has been deeply humbling and has encouraged Carn to move forward with greater honesty, responsibility, and integrity. The statement also expressed gratitude to the court for carefully considering the case and thanked Carn's family, church members, and supporters who stood beside him throughout one of the most difficult periods of his life. His legal team insisted that he is committed to fulfilling every obligation placed upon him while continuing to grow both personally and spiritually. Even so, not everyone is convinced that the controversy can be explained so simply. Among his followers, opinions remain deeply divided. Some believe the entire case grew out of poor financial decisions made during the explosive growth of his ministry, rather than any deliberate attempt to deceive the government. They point to Carn's repeated acceptance of responsibility and his public admissions that he mishandled his finances as evidence that he deserves an opportunity to rebuild. Some people, however, view the situation from a very different perspective. They believe the federal investigation exposed deeper questions about financial management, leadership, and accountability within ministries that oversee large sums of money. To these critics, the case serves as a powerful reminder that no one, including respected religious leaders, is above the law, and that spiritual influence does not remove the responsibility to uphold legal and ethical standards. Whatever conclusion people choose to reach, one reality can no longer be ignored. Brian Carn's legacy has changed forever. For years, he was best known as a gifted young preacher whose prophetic ministry attracted thousands across the country. Today, that story carries another chapter that cannot be separated from the first. Alongside his sermons, conferences, and spiritual influence, his name is now permanently linked to a federal tax conviction that reshaped his public image, tested the loyalty of his supporters, and altered the future of the ministry he spent years building. So, what do you think about Brian Carn's sentencing? Can he regain the trust that took him years to build? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.